Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today we are going to analyze the Hindu dated 5th of February 2020. Displayed on the screen is a list of articles that we are going to discuss today. Time stamping for the same has been provided in the description of the video. Let's begin our analysis. Page number 10 of today's newspaper presents a wonderful article which talks about continuity and fiscal follow-through. Now, this article is important from the perspective of 15th Finance Commission and the recent occurrence in case of submission of interim report. Now, we are very well aware that 15th Finance Commission has submitted its interim report for the year 2020 to 2021. Apart from that, Commission will also submit a report for 2021 to 2025. Now, this is one-off situation where Commission has submitted a report on annual basis and another report for the next of the period for the Finance Commission. And in the discussion that we are going to take forward, we'll be discussing the reasons for the same. But before understanding the Finance Commission's report in detail, let's try to understand what is the Finance Commission and what is the need of such body. Now, as far as the Finance Commission is concerned, it is a constitutional body which is mandated through Article 280 of the Indian Constitution. At the same time, this is a mechanism to solve fiscal imbalance. Now, we need to understand what is fiscal imbalance or what causes fiscal imbalances. Now, we know that India is a federal country. One of the features of the federal country is that power is distributed between center and states. And when we talk about powers, we are talking about three kinds of powers in this case. First and foremost, the legislative power or the power to make laws. Second is the executive, which means carrying out the legislative proposals. And third is the power of finance. Now, in the case of India, when we talk about these three powers, that is legislative, executive, and finance, the federal structure is made in such a manner that it is heavily biased in favor of the center. Now, how it is done? Let's see. Now, if we define through this graph where we have highlighted the responsibility factor and the revenue factor, we can see that responsibility is very high in case of states. At the same time, when we talk about the responsibilities of union, these responsibilities are very few. Now, let's try to understand in the simple context. If we go through the list mentioned in the Constitution, if we go by the list 1, the most important activity of the union government is the legislation itself. And one of the primary activities, which is basically a big guzzler for the government, is the defense. Rest of the activities, if we talk about, be it education, health, law and order, etc., come under the purview of the state. So we can see that the responsibility scope of the states is much higher in comparison to the union. At the same time, when we talk about the revenue per se, the revenue share of union is much higher than that of states. And this actually has a flawed relationship in action. So in this context, what happens is that the responsibility factor of the union is much less, but at the same time, they hold much more revenue in hand. At the same time, when we talk about responsibility share of states, it is much higher than that of the center, but the revenue proportion is much less. And this causes a fiscal imbalance, which is being addressed through Finance Commission. So the mechanism to solve this kind of fiscal imbalance, which a federal country normally puts forward, is dealt through Finance Commission. So that is what the objective of Finance Commission is. So there are imbalances in the revenue and expenditure and can be seen as imbalance in the income and responsibility of the states. And that is why it causes two kinds of imbalances. One imbalance is called as vertical imbalance. And when we talk about vertical imbalance, it simply means the imbalance between the center and the states. And when we talk about horizontal imbalance, then we talk about states in comparison with each other. So this relationship, when we talk about states, it leads to horizontal imbalance. And when we talk about center in states, this causes as vertical imbalance. Now here it is also important to highlight that this kind of fiscal imbalance is more of a norm in any kind of federal country. Even if we talk about a country like USA, these kind of imbalances do exist and they also have a mechanism to solve this kind of a problem. So the situation in India is no different than any other functional federal system in the world. Now let's try to understand why does this vertical imbalances occur. Now let us continue our discussion about why this vertical imbalance exists at the very first place between the center and the states. Now we know that, as has already been explained through the diagram, that there is a mismatch of responsibilities and the revenue sources between the union and the states. Now we need to understand why this was done, and this was basically done for two simple reasons. First and foremost, the constitution assigned taxes with nationwide base to the union. And these are important because they earn much more higher revenue for the government. Now let's take example of excise and income tax. These earn much more revenue for the central government in comparison to any other taxation which is given to the state government, and hence there is a lopsided process. Now there must be a very strong reason to follow this mechanism. Why this was done? This was done to make the country one common economic space unhindered by internal barriers to the extent possible. And this is the reason why those taxes which had nationwide base were given to the union. Now the second important aspect is constitution assigned responsibilities involving high expenditure disproportionate to their assigned sources of revenue. So this has already been highlighted in the diagram that we have discussed in the previous slide, in which higher scope of responsibility is not matched with similar expense in revenue for the state. Since the expenditures are incurred mainly in the executive branch, let us first understand the constitutional scheme for the same, which is mentioned through lists. So we know that the federal structure of India has lists. List 1 relates to the union government, list 2 relates to the state government, and list 3 is called the concurrent list. Now when we talk about the list 1, the legislative responsibility as well as its execution is related to the union. So this is a good match of situation. At the same time, when we focus on the list 2 and list 3, in list 2, state is responsible and state has to execute. But when we talk about the list 3, which is concurrent, both can actually legislate, but at the same time the center has an upper hand in case of legislation, but at the same time the responsibility of carrying out the items listed in the list 3 is that with the state. So this basically makes the execution much more difficult. Legislation is much more easy, but at the same time execution requires much more resources. But we have seen in the previous slide that the most of the resources are given to the union government. Now we need to have a justification for giving states the responsibility of execution. And the justification for the same is that state being closer to people and more sensitive to local needs, these execution have been assigned to the state. So we can see that the assignment of taxes more towards the center, at the same time assignment of execution more towards the state has caused the problem of vertical imbalances. And this is the reason why the Finance Commission has come into operation. Now, it is also important for us to understand why horizontal imbalances occur in our system. Now we have understood the idea of vertical imbalance. Now let's focus on horizontal imbalance which is caused among the states. Now for this particular purpose, let's try to understand the constitutional provisions. Now we know that Article 280 mandates the establishment of Finance Commission. At the same time, we need to go through Part 3, Provision A and B in more detail. Now, the Part A says the distribution between the union and the states of net proceeds of taxes which are to be or may be divided between them under this chapter, and the allocation between the states of respective share of such proceeds. So you can see that when you talk about Article 283A, it basically puts a mechanism into picture which can solve vertical as well as horizontal distribution. At the same time, when we focus on Part B, the principle which should govern the grants and aids in the revenue of the states out of the Consolidated Fund of India. Now, this is where the objective of horizontal imbalance comes into picture. And this is important from the perspective of the examination, that you have these articles clear in your mind. Now, if we pay attention to Article 281, one of the interpretation is that Finance Commission has to submit its report for every 5 years. And we are also aware that when you talk about 14th Finance Commission, the 14th Finance Commission's recommendations were applicable from 2015 to 2020. Now, in the current context, when we are discussing this article, we know that Finance Commission has submitted, that is 15th Finance Commission has submitted an interim report which is valid for year 2020 to 2021. And there will be another report that will cover from 2021 to 2025. So we need to understand why this 1 year report is given and why the report will be given in two parts. And that is the point of discussion for our coming slide. So the 15th Finance Commission was required to submit its report by 30th of October 2019. And this would have covered the period of 2020 to 2025. At the same time, there has been an extension given and there were two reports which are submitted. First is an interim report for the period 2020 to 2021, and there will be another report which will cover 2021 to 2025. Now let's try to understand why this has been done. The first reason for this extension is change in the federal units. Now you might be aware that Article 370 has been abrogated and Jammu and Kashmir has been converted into a union territory. And since there is a change in the federal unit, the Commission was required to make an estimation excluding the union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. And this is the reason why extension was given to accommodate this change. Second important aspect is historically low nominal growth rate. Now we are aware of the fact that Indian economy is not growing as fast as it was expected. This has substantially slowed down the nominal GDP growth, which is one of the main tax-based proxy, making projections of tax revenue and expenditure based on this for the medium term could have posed serious risk. Now to understand this thing, let's take an example through a graph. Now when we talk about any kind of a projection, we require a curve which is of continuous nature. At the same time, if there is a curve which is more up and down in nature, it is very difficult to make projections. And hence, this nominal growth rate and up and down trend of economy has forced the Finance Commission to break its report into two parts. Another very significant aspect is issues related to tax revenue. Now we know that GST has been implemented in India. At the same time, there has been poor revenue performance in terms of tax collection, and that is related to GST. Also, the compensation agreement to the loss of the revenue to the states is applicable only till 2022. It is also important to highlight that the center has not paid the loss in revenue to many states for which a guaranteed increase of 14% was promised by the center. So these are the factors which have compelled the extension of the term of 15th Finance Commission as well as its submission of interim report. Now let us discuss the major highlights of this report, that is 15th Finance Commission report. Now the reports of Finance Commission are basically seen in comparison. Now when we talk about 15th Finance Commission, we will see it in comparison to the 14th Finance Commission. Now when we talk about vertical distribution, 14th Finance Commission recommended that 42% of the tax revenue should be transferred to the state. At the same time, 15th Finance Commission recommended only 41%. So there is a decrease of 1%. Now the reason for this is highlighted in the remark. The 15th Finance Commission continued with the recommendation of the previous commission relating to vertical division of taxes and adjusted the state share to 41% to exclude the share of Jammu and Kashmir. Now as already mentioned, Jammu and Kashmir was earlier a state and now it has been converted into a union territory. And hence there has been a decrease of 1% in terms of transfer to the states. Now when we talk about the horizontal distribution, we need to pay attention to population, income distance, area, forest and demographic performance of the states. Now when we talk about 14th Finance Commission, 14th Finance Commission population played a very important role. 1971 population had a weight of 17.5% and 2011 population base had a contribution of 10%. So collectively this was 27.5%. So this negatively influences allocation of funds to the states which have performed very well in terms of controlling the population, like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and other states. At the same time, states like UP and Bihar, which have not implemented the family planning measures in the right fashion, they get benefited out of this. Now, the 15th Finance Commission has tried to solve this problem. They have allocated 15% of funds on the basis of 2011 population. At the same time, they have given 12.5% to inverse the fertility rate, hence showing sensitivity towards the concern of the states which have performed better in terms of population control. So this is a very important aspect of 15th Finance Commission. Please understand a simple thing. If we would have gone through with the provisions of 14th Finance Commission, then states like UP, Bihar, and other states which have higher population would have got more funds. At the same time, those states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu, which have done efforts to control the population, would have received less funds. So, in this case, the states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu would have been at a disadvantage in comparison to the states which have not done enough in terms of controlling the population. And 15th Finance Commission has tried to solve this problem by dividing the resources into two parts. First is the population part, and second, efforts to inverse the fertility rate. And this is the highlight factor of this 15th Finance Commission report. Another significant aspect which 15th Finance Commission has implemented is the income distance factor. Now, when we talk about income distance factor, 50% of the weight was given in the 14th Finance Commission. However, 45% of weight is given in the 15th Finance Commission. This is done to encourage the states who have done better to bridge income disparity. Now, the reason for this is very simple to understand. States like Kerala and Karnataka, the per capita income has grown faster than other states. And hence, if income distance criteria is not diluted, as we have seen in the 15th Finance Commission report, then these states would have been at a disadvantage. And this would have been a very sorry state of affairs because these states have worked hard to improve the quality of life for their people. And hence, they should be rewarded rather than penalized for this effort. So, this income distance factor and demographic performance indicator is the highlight of 15th Finance Commission interim report. Now let us focus on the last part of discussion for this article. So what are the recommendations of the 15th Finance Commission regarding local body grants? So local body will be given grants of 60,750 crores for panchayats, and for the purpose of municipalities 29,250 crores will be given. Now the conditions are that 50% of these grants is tied to improving sanitation and water supply of drinking water. Now, when we talk about 50%, it means roughly 30,375 crore in terms of grant will be given as per the provisions laid out. Similarly, when we talk about municipalities, 9,229 crores is given to million plus cities or metropolitan cities, and 20,021 crores for rest of the municipalities. Again, 50% of the grant is tied to improving sanitation and supply of drinking water. So in this case, we can again say roughly 15,000 crores is tied to the provision mentioned below. Another aspect that we need to discuss is the disaster management. For disaster management, a total of rupees 28,183 crores has been determined, of which central contribution will be 22,184 crores. The Commission has recommended the creation of disaster mitigation fund at the center and the state levels. But how is this remaining amount distributed among the states? Interstate allocation is made based on the past expenditure, area and population and disaster risk index. Now the last part of the discussion deals with sectoral grants, and when we talk about sectoral grants, we are focusing on nutrition. The Finance Commission has worked out a framework for giving some sectoral grants as well. For 2020-21, it has recommended rupees 7,735 crores for improving nutrition based on the number of children in the age group of 0 to 6 years and lactating mothers. So these are the sectoral grants of the 15th Finance Commission. Page number 11 of today's newspaper presents an article which talks about Navy to the rescue. Now, in light of the natural calamities that have hit the nations of Indian Ocean region, the role of Navy has become very important. And this has been brought to light or discussion by the sending of warship Aravat from India to Madagascar for the purpose of relief work under the Operation Vanilla. Now, India has done many such humanitarian efforts in the recent past, and this is an important point of discussion for the author. Now, in this context, this topic is important from the perspective of General Studies Paper 2, and it will be covered under the topic of international relations. As a subtopic, it will be covered under India and its neighborhood relations, and it will also be focusing on bilateral, regional, and global groupings and agreements involving India and or affecting India's interest. Now, in order to properly understand this article, we need to highlight three important aspects which are used in this article as well. First and foremost is the Indian Ocean region. Second important aspect that we need to focus upon is about Sagar policy of the government. The acronym SAGAR means security and growth for all in the region. And when we talk about the region, we are focusing on Indian Ocean region. Third important aspect which the author highlights is about caution that we need to follow when we carry out any kind of humanitarian assistance to any country in the neighboring area. So in this context, this topic is important from Indian Ocean region, Sagar policy and cautions that we should follow. This can be utilized wonderfully into a mains question as well. At the end of this discussion, we will share a question with you which you can write and practice for the mains question. Let's begin our analysis. Now let's answer the first question first. What is Indian Ocean region or IOR? Now when we talk about IOR in the map, it is duly reflected that this is spread in three parts. First and foremost is Africa and Middle East. Second is South Asia, and third is East Asia and Pacific. So we can see that countries like South Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, Yemen, Oman, Iran, they are part of Africa and Middle East. Then Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka are part of South Asia. Rest of the countries like Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, Brunei, and Australia are part of East Asia and Pacific. So in a nutshell, IOR consists of 28 countries and which are spread into three continents. It covers around 17.5% of the landmass, and this area is very important from the perspective of demography as well, as 35% of the total population of the world resides in this area. This area is very rich in terms of resource base, and the maritime and safety and security in this area is important for global stability and trade. So this area is very important from the purpose of strategy. So this area is very important from the perspective of geography, and it is very important for us to understand what is India's stake in terms of Indian Ocean region. Maritime importance of this region is very high. At the same time, this region is also very important from the perspective of resources. Now, this area is very rich in resources. It holds 16.8% of world's proven oil reserves. At the same time, it also holds 27.9% of proven natural gas reserves. So this area is very important from the perspective of oil and gas. Apart from that, Indian Ocean economies accounted for 35.5% of the global iron production, 17.8% of world gold production in 2017. Also important is the yield of ocean in terms of fish as well. 28% of global fish capture has been reported from this area, and the production from this area has been expanding since 1950s. So apart from oil and gas, mineral resources and fish yield, this area is also important from the perspective of export industries. Now Indonesia and India accounted for 4.5% of global frozen fish export in 2017. Now the abundance of natural resources among other factors has facilitated trade-led growth within this region, and hence the importance of this region is very high in the global dynamics as well. For this particular purpose, we need to understand the role of India in the Indian Ocean region. Now, blue economy is a very important aspect for the growth and development of any country, and Indian Ocean offers a unique advantage to India to exploit this to the hilt. Now, in this context, we should know that Indian Ocean region is abundant with resources, particularly fisheries, aquaculture, ocean energy, seabed mining, and minerals. And these provide tremendous economic opportunities to develop marine tourism and shipping activities as well. Apart from that, polymetallic nodules and polymetallic massive sulfides are two mineral sources of commercial interest in the Indian Ocean region. Now, if you pay attention to the diagram which is highlighted here, it shows the boundary of India. And we can see that all the shaded region in the Indian Ocean part basically show the presence of polymetallic nodules. So you can see how rich this particular region is, and exploitation of these resources can be utilized for the growth and development of the country and for the purpose of exports. Now, polymetallic sulfides are found in deep seabed and contain iron, copper, zinc, silver, gold, and platinum. So, in this fashion, we can see that how rich India is in terms of availability of resources. And if we can utilize the resources which are there on the seabed, especially polymetallic sulfides, then this can propel India to growth and development, which would be unprecedented. Apart from that blue economy, there is strategic importance as well. Now, when we talk about Indian Ocean region, it basically acts as a bridge for Indo-Pacific construct, and this has been the center of gravity in the current geopolitics scenario. Moreover, with the rise of China in the recent decades, India has engaged in further enhancing its security presence and act as net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. So there is strategic importance as well as important things in terms of economy which favor India in terms of geographical location and its role in the Indian Ocean region. So in light of the strategic importance of Indian Ocean region, India is spearheading various regional initiatives in the IOR, and these include the Indian Ocean Rim Association, which is an intergovernmental organization established in 1997 to enhance cooperation among the member states whose shores are in the rim of Indian Ocean. Apart from that, the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, Indian Ocean Commission, and the recently announced the government scheme of Sagar, that is security and growth for all in the region, has also featured in India's initiative in participation and leading the particular region. Now let us focus on Sagar initiative, which basically directs India's effort in the region. Now Sagar represents India's vision for Indian Ocean region, and this initiative was launched in 2015 in order to develop blue economy in the Indian Ocean region by way of linking maritime connectivity, maritime security, and economic development. Through Sagar initiative, India has also entered into bilateral defense cooperation mechanism with countries like Seychelles, Mauritius, and Maldives. Apart from this, this initiative of Sagar also provides a mechanism for India's strategic partnership with other IOR littoral states in Africa as well as in Asia. Also important here is to highlight that the Western Indian Ocean, if we talk about the gross marine product, is valued at around $20.8 billion. And thus, developing blue economy is seen as a strategy to develop the region, and India intends to act as the leader in this case. So these are the important initiatives which government has taken in the recent past to ensure its leadership and participation in the development process in the region. So we have discussed some of the opportunities that are available for India in terms of blue economy. At the same time, this region has faced multiple challenges. Now this includes piracy, smuggling, threat to energy security, illegal fishing, illegal migration, and human trafficking, etc. So we need to take a view on this region in terms of solving these problems to a great extent as well. For this purpose, the countries which are participating in the region are trying to streamline their process to fight these menaces. Apart from this, Government of India has taken other initiatives as well. As already mentioned, India has acted as net security provider for the countries in the region through various initiatives. Apart from that, India also hosted its first joint military outreach program with African nations, which was called as FINDEX 2019. This was one of the largest outreach programs conducted by India, and it included 17 African nations. India has developed coastal radar surveillance network, deploying coastal radars in Seychelles, Mauritius, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Thailand, and Indonesia. India has also actively engaged in countering the Somalian piracy. Apart from that, Indian Navy has active naval presence in Indian Ocean region around the Horn of Africa to combat piracy. The port of Djibouti had also been used by Indian naval ships since 2008 for anti-piracy mission, and there have been many missions which are reported in the news and media where India has helped in freeing ships from pirates. Page number 10 of today's newspaper presents an article which talks about a case of a maritime presence adrift. In the subheading, the authors highlight that India's negligible presence and intervention in International Maritime Organization is affecting its interest. In this context, this article is important from the perspective of international relations and international organization. At the same time, this article is important from the perspective of prelims as well as for mains. Now, we need to understand the context of the article, which is highlighted by the authors. Now, International Maritime Organization, which is a United Nations agency, has recently issued a direction in which merchant ships should not burn fuel with sulfur content of greater than 0.5%. Now, in this case, this is done to ensure that pollution is curbed. Now, the authors highlight that India is also a member of International Maritime Organization, and such kind of decision is going to influence India's interest because the kind of fuel that we are using, it has sulfur content of the limit 3.5%. So if we start using a new type of fuel which has 0.5% sulfur, this is going to affect India's interest, and in this case or context, India should put across her view to protect its interest. Now, when we talk about the new mandate, the IMO currently lists India as among 10 states with the largest interest in international seaborne trade. Around 90% of India's external trade by volume and 70% by value are handled by ports. Any such change in the maritime regulation is going to affect India's interest immensely, and that is what being highlighted by the author. Because the new very low sulfur fuel would be incompatible with the kind of engines and other vessel equipments that India is using. And if we are going to make any kind of changes in that, ships' operational costs will go up tremendously. Now, shipping is a very important aspect for any economy. Refineries in India struggle to meet the demand. Freight costs have started moving up with the cascading effect on retail prices. So, this is something which is very important for India in terms of maintaining price stability as well. Apart from this, when we talk about the fitment of the new equipment and changes to the ship structural design, it is going to benefit companies which are based in the West. It means that India's strategic interests are being compromised by this direction, and India should take note of that and represent its views at the international level. This is what the purpose of the article is in this context. Now, authors also highlight that this is not the first time when India is negatively impacted by IMO regulations. There have been many instances in the past as well. One such instance is the International Maritime Organization demarks particular areas as high risk areas. Now, when we talk about high risk areas, half of the Arabian Sea and virtually entire southwest coast of India is considered to be piracy invested. Now, when you demarcate a particular area into high risk areas, the insurance costs go up tremendously. So, this led to the ballooning of insurance cost and it affected goods coming into or out of India. So, in this way, we can see that any kind of IMO regulation should be considered very closely for protecting India's interest. When this situation was identified, efforts were taken to remove the promulgation and negate the financial burden. India has also faced great difficulty in introducing the indigenously designed NAVIC, that is, navigation with Indian constellation, in the worldwide maritime navigation system. And this again happened because IMO regulations did not allow this thing to be implemented. So, the basic purpose which authors want to highlight is that the most important reason for this fallout is apathy and inadequacy of Indian diplomacy and participation in IMO. Authors go on to explain that why there is inadequacy on part of India's effort. Now, India's permanent representative post in London has remained vacant for last 25 years. And this shows that India has not participated in the activities of the IMO, even when the IMO regulations have negatively impacted India's interest every now and then. At the same time, prominent maritime nations have their permanent representatives at London and are supported by a large contingent during the meetings. At the same time, these representatives and their contingent try to generate goodwill and support through sponsorship, etc. Authors also highlight that submissions made by India in the recent past has been measly and not in proportion to India's stake in the global shipping. The European Union has a well documented procedure on how to influence IMO, and the authors are of opinion that we need to take cues from the prominent maritime nations and develop a similar policy to protect our interest. Authors went on to highlight that India should now make its presence felt at IMO so that national interests are served and India regains its status of major maritime power. Now, in the context of the news, it is important for us to know about International Maritime Organization as well. Now, as already mentioned, International Maritime Organization is a specialized agency of the United Nations which is responsible for regulating shipping at global scale. Its headquarters is located in London, and currently there are 174 member states and 3 associate members. Apart from countries, there are also scores of non-governmental and intergovernmental organizations which are participating in the operations of International Maritime Organization. The binding instruments are brought in through the conventions to which member states sign on for compliance. And the similar process is adopted for amendment to the same and related codes. To curb emission from shippings, IMO has agreed on an ambition to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for the shipping by at least 50% by 2050. Now, since pollution is one of the global problems, IMO has set a target of decarbonization with the development and deployment of commercially viable deep sea zero emission vessels by 2030. The point of discussion in terms of reducing the sulfur from the fuel also comes from the similar objective. Now, International Maritime Organization has adopted many conventions. At the same time, Facilitation of International Maritime Traffic or FAL Convention and Bunker Convention were in news recently. Now, in the PDF of this video, we have mentioned about both the conventions in terms of basic understanding. Please go through these conventions and keep a note of important points related to them. On the page number 11, there is an article which talks about beyond preparedness. It talks about long-term recovery is a key aspect of disaster management but is neglected in the Act. Now, in this context, it is important for us to understand that the article flags some of the concerns on the proposed changes in the Disaster Management Act of 2005 through an amendment. However, the proposed changes which are highlighted by the author are not in public domain and the article does not mention them specifically. At the same time, the author has given direction in terms of the proposed changes and what should be incorporated in terms of the changes in the Disaster Management Act of 2005. Now, one of the things that author has highlighted is that the primary focus of Disaster Management Act of 2005 was to reduce risk, and for which the government has done very well. According to the author, some of the proposed changes in the Disaster Management Act of 2005 through amendment should be improving the preparedness. Now, the author has highlighted that in the previous act, the focus has been on the relief work after the disaster has been struck and also about the awareness. At the same time, improving preparedness means having right kind of infrastructure in place and in action to ensure that whenever such a situation arises, this can be translated into action. Now, the important aspect of preparedness is to provide immediate relief, which is very important in case of disaster. Now, when cyclone, earthquake, or any kind of similar disaster strikes, what is important is to provide immediate relief, and this can actually save life and property to a great extent. The author also highlights that there is a need to protect the infrastructure as well. Now, infrastructure is important for the economic growth and development of the country, and in the case of disaster, the focus is more towards life, which is very right. At the same time, infrastructure should also be protected because this allows long term recovery much more easy for the areas which are affected by disaster. So the author puts forward the idea that now the focus should be on the long term recovery. Immediate recovery is done very well, but at the same time, long term recovery for a particular area is an important concern. And this is what the author has highlighted. The current recovery strategy is very narrow and short term, and it focuses only on the physical recovery, including food, water, and medicine. So, these are the issues that the kind of recovery that we are focusing in this case are very narrow in nature. We need to understand that we need to do much more in case of recovery for the people who are affected by disaster. So author moves on to tell what should be done. Now in terms of what should be done, the focus is on long-term recovery plans. Now when we focus on long-term recovery plans, we need to focus on the kind of vulnerabilities that might struck a particular area or people. In this case, the author highlights that long-term recovery plan is what is expected from the amendment. Apart from that, disaster preparedness should also include psycho and social losses because people who survive these disasters go through a lot of psychological and emotional problems. And hence, there is an emergent need to prepare for disaster in this context as well. However, this article talks about issues which are still in continuation. In this case, we would recommend that we should wait for the Amendment Act to come in open and then discuss this article in terms of concept building. Till that time, you can keep these points in mind so that you understand the topic when it is discussed next time. Based on today's discussion, let's take a practice question. First question is, which of the statements about Finance Commission are correct? The first statement is it is a constitutional body, which is correct as this is mentioned in Article 280. And second is its recommendations are binding in nature for the government. The second part is incorrect as the recommendation of Finance Commission are advisory in nature. So statement 1 is incorrect. Second is the establishment of Finance Commission weakens the fiscal federalism in India. This is incorrect as the establishment of Finance Commission strengthens fiscal federalism. Hence, the correct option in this case is option D, neither 1 nor 2. Practice question number 2. Consider the following statements about Indian Ocean region. First is countries littoral to Bay of Bengal are excluded from Indian Ocean region. This is incorrect because we know that Myanmar is also part of Indian Ocean region and it is littoral to Bay of Bengal. So first statement is incorrect. And the second is the only choke point to the Indian Ocean region is Malaccan Strait. Now this is incorrect. There are many choke points like Bab al-Mandeb and hence this statement is incorrect. So in this context, the correct answer is option D, neither 1 nor 2. With this, we have come to the end of today's session. Let's move to the question of the day. Question for the day is, which of the following statements are correct? Statement number 1 is, International Maritime Organization or IMO is the largest UN body. Second is, it is headquartered in Brussels, Belgium. Third is, all the conventions of the IMO are binding on the member state. And fourth is, India is one of the founding members of the IMO. Select the correct answer using the code given below, where option A reads 2 and 3 only, option B reads 2 and 4 only, option C reads 1, 2 and 3 only, and option D reads 4 only.